to call to order the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for June 15th, 2020. Thank you all for joining us if you're here. I'd like to start with citizen comment on any agenda items. And we've noted here in our pre-council discussions that there may be some telephone outages or cell telephone outages in the Wheat Ridge area. It affected me this afternoon, and we hope that's not the case. But anyway, I would like to invite any members of the public who would like to speak on any agenda items only. If you would like to speak on any agenda items only, and that would really be item number 1, the neighborhood revitalization strategy, the engagement implementation is what we're talking about tonight. So if you would like to speak on that, you may do so now. If you would just speak up, I will recognize you. And you can speak. I see someone perhaps trying to speak, a telephone number ending in 1340, but I don't hear any audio. Sorry, I still don't hear any audio.
I wasn't saying anything tonight. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. If you would, if you're not speaking, if you would please mute your microphones. That helps us keep down the background noise. So once again, is there anyone, any citizens out there who'd like to speak under citizens comment on any agenda item? That would be item number 1, the neighborhood revitalization strategy. Okay, well, we will complete our citizens comment on agenda items and go to item number 1. That's the neighborhood revitalization strategy, the engagement implementation. Mr. Goff, you've got several of your staff with us. You want to carry it from here?
We do. I'll just go ahead and turn it over to them so we don't repeat ourselves, but we do have Ken Johnstone and Lauren Michalak and Jeff Hurt here this evening. We're excited to roll out our neighborhood engagement program that was part of the NRS. And so I'll just turn it over, I believe, probably to Ken to do some introductions maybe too.
Great. Well, Ken, nice to have you with us.
Nice to be here. Good evening, Mayor, Council, and whomever else has taken their evening out to spend some time with us. Thank you for doing that. I'm going to kick it off. I'm Ken Johnstone, the city's community development director, and I do have Lauren Michalak, the city's planning manager, and Jeff Hurt, one of the newer members of the community development team with us. He's our senior neighborhood planner, and we'll introduce him a little more further in a moment. But yes, we're excited to be in front of council tonight to talk about the next steps in a fairly thorough way, so bear with us. In terms of the 2020-2021 neighborhood engagement efforts, which was, as Patrick noted, one of the core recommendations of the 2019 NRS update, which was adopted by council in July of last year, so coming up on a year anniversary. So I'm going to get us started and then turn it over to Lauren and Jeff to do different parts as well. So trying to keep it a little interesting with a few different voices and faces in front of you for the presentation. So 3 goals for tonight, as you saw on the last slide there. Sorry, Jeff. Jeff is controlling there we go. And so you can see those on the screen. Again, a fairly thorough update on this new program. And as always.
Hey,
the quirks of Zoom meetings, huh? And of course, looking to get your feedback as always. So 4 specific topics to cover. I'm going to get us started with the first one, which is the NRS background, which will be a brief kind of historical perspective on the original 2005 neighborhood revitalization strategy. In part because we do have 4 still relatively new, I emphasize relatively because you're all doing a great job, city council members who might have a little less familiarity with that 2005 document that's been a real important policy document for us over the past 10 to 15 years. Lauren is then going to give an update and an overview on the 2019 NRS update process and what those outcomes and recommendations were and very much specific for tonight, focused on this very granular level recommendation of neighborhood engagement, which we've got a lot of information for you on tonight. And then finally, Jeff will provide an overview of the progress he's made to date, creating really that program from scratch, what's been done so far, what's in the works in both the short and the kind of medium terms. So this is just an image of the 2005 NRS. It was a lengthy process over the course of about 2 years with a really good consulting team, but perhaps more importantly, very extensive community engagement as part of that process. And that certainly happened again in 2019. And we'll talk about that in a moment when Lauren goes over that process. And we've got 2 new council members who were an integral part of that team. So I would just make a couple observations about the 2005 NRS. I would say it didn't pull any punches in laying out kind of the positive and negative attributes and aspects of the city at that point in time in 2004, 2005. For what it's worth, I've said this certainly before, perhaps to some of you, but it was a big influencing factor for me when I had the opportunity to take this position as community development director for the city in 2007. I was really kind of struck by the ability of the community to really, take a really not harsh, but a really honest assessment of where the community stood, and really, more importantly, lay out a really exhaustive work program. It's a very detailed document and laid out a lot of very specific action items at both a kind of a macro and a micro level. And that was a really exciting opportunity for me as to where the community was at and what I'd have to have an opportunity to participate in as part of the community development team and the city team. So again, it was adopted formally by City Council by resolution in 2005. It was subsequently adopted, I believe, in 2007 or maybe early 2008 as an amendment to the city's comprehensive plan. And that was done really principally because many of the recommendations from the 2005 NRS really had the potential to inform decision-making at a policy level that City Council and the Planning Commission make relative to criteria in the zoning code that require them to look at the comprehensive plan as one of their reference points in making decisions on things like rezoning applications. So we thought it was important to adopt it as a formal amendment to the comprehensive plan subsequent to its initial adoption. And I just note, while it's called a neighborhood revitalization strategy, it's really evaluated and assessed the kind of the state of the entire city. And it provided a very broad list of policy recommendations for Wheat Ridge to, I guess I'd say, realize its full potential. Doing a great job, Jeff, in the background there for now. So what were some of the key findings? And I'll keep these brief, but focusing on a few of the strengths and a few of the weaknesses. A variety of strengths that were identified as part of that 2005 process. One, a very engaged community, lots of engaged stakeholders. And, I'd make the observation as well, a very proud community, proud of its past, proud of its present state, proud of its future. And we'll talk about that later in terms of 2019, but that remains the case. Second, perhaps a somewhat undiscovered housing stock, larger lots maybe than some of the nearby communities, notably, maybe Lakewood and Denver. Really strong neighborhoods, unique neighborhoods, some mid-century character. So really a strong housing stock with a lot of upside potential. And I think a theme that we continue to emphasize, and you're all well aware of, which is just a great location in the metro area, close to downtown, if that's where your job is, or that's where you access recreation or jobs or cultural amenities or entertainment. And then also, 15, 20 minutes closer to the mountains. And then of course, relatively attractive housing prices particularly at that time, but I think still so to some extent. And then just to, the weaknesses, I don't want to dwell on this back at that time, but I think just as maybe an overall comment, I think the weaknesses that it identified were just that it had perhaps stagnated a bit in the preceding years relative to its peer communities, being, Denver and Lakewood and Arvada that surround us. And then just one more slide for me, and then I'll turn it over to Lauren, and we'll get on to the present and the 2019 update. But three maybe core themes in terms of the recommendations that the document made, because there's a lot of them, so it's hard to distill into a few comments. But one, create local works, which at the time was originally created as Wheat Ridge 2020, and use that group as a way to encourage redevelopment, reinvestment, and actively engage kind of the community in I'll call it civic life. And a lot of progress has been made in that regard. A real fundamental recommendation was that we needed to change the way that the community manages change. And that was a big recommendation and fairly specific to the extent that it recommended a new comprehensive plan, it recommended new sub-area plans, it recommended major regulatory changes to really change how we do business. And then finally, as kind of a summary recommendation, was to revitalize some of the city's major transportation corridors. So Wadsworth and Kipling and 38th. And I guess I observed that we as a city, us as a department, really took these recommendations to heart. And as a result, a lot of change has occurred. We updated the comp plan in 2009. We've adopted 3 corridor sub-area plans in the intervening years. We've made a number of regulatory changes, some fairly significant in terms of kind of that theme of managing how the city manages change. And in part because of those actions, and in part maybe just because of larger market forces in the real estate world, there's been a lot of change that has occurred. And I think those were some of the reasons that in 2019, we embarked on this effort to update the NRS, to once again take a peek and a step back to see where we stood as a community, where our community members perceived us to be, where we believed ourselves to be kind of in the broader real estate market. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Lauren to go over the 2019 NRS process and some of the recommendations that came out of that process.
Thanks, Ken.
Can
you
you hear me?
A little echo. Yeah. Is that any better? Nope. How about now?
No, I can hear you, Lauren.
Yeah.
Still an echo. On that point.
That's a bit.
Still an echo.
Still an echo.
Does it grow on an echo?
How about now?
Is better.
Okay.
Sounds
Super.
better.
I'll leave my video off just in case. Thanks, everyone. So my comments are brief because the 2019 update is hopefully somewhat more fresh in your minds, but we did want to tell the story of sort of the inception of where we've come. So for those of you who aren't as familiar, the engagement recommendation did come out of the more recent NRS document, which was adopted by Council in July of 2019. And as Ken described, the city and metro area really had changed quite a bit from 2005 to 2018. That's a period of 13 years. We had had the recession, we'd come back from the recession, and it really was time to not only just update the document, but take the pulse of the community and create a new roadmap or work plan for our city and our department specifically. So we used the same consultant team, that was CZB, and frankly, the greatest strength of this update process was the Citizen Steering Committee. It was a council-appointed group of 26 members with a great amount of diversity, a wide range of ages and tenures in Wheat Ridge, renters and owners, residents and employers, and a wide range of opinions as well. Staff really took a backseat role in this process, and the Citizen Steering Committee volunteered hundreds of hours over the course of the year, working both with the consultant team and with the public, their neighbors and their peers. The steering committee were the ones that hosted small group meetings and open houses and included and encouraged thousands of voices in the process. And this document, as you've looked at probably both of them, it looks really different, and it really had a different focus than the original document, with this central question of how Wheat Ridge can maintain its fundamental values and character while managing inevitable change. And it still feels like a very relevant question. I think it probably will for a long time. Through all of the engagement and data analysis, 4 things became really clear. On the good side, in general, Wheat Ridge residents appear to be pretty content. We did surveys, qualitative and quantitative data, and quality of life is generally really positive in Wheat Ridge. Data indicators are proving that our market has strengthened since the original NRS. Real estate market is stronger, and incomes and education levels appear to be rising. And the updated NRS draws a really elegant distinction between corridors and neighborhoods. So Ken mentioned one of the original documents had a recommendation on corridors. That's still relevant. It's always ongoing work to maintain commercial corridors. Still a desire on the public's behalf to see our primary corridors be more attractive and have better shopping and dining options. And at the neighborhood level, while quality of life is generally good, there's still a definite discomfort related to change, the pace of change and the look of change. And that finding is not a surprise to anyone here. It came out through many conversations and always often does. But in this case, it was really combined with a real desire from the public for positive connection and engagement. And obviously it's that last finding that results in the program that we're happy to present to you tonight in its very nation form. This excerpt from the plan is the first recommendation to help build resident capacity for managing change. And the NRS document doesn't prescribe exactly how that looks. Jeff got kind of a blank slate when he started with us, but the adopted document does provide some guidelines that you may be familiar with. So it recommended 1 to 2 years of proactive and focused engagement to better understand neighborhood level issues, trying to understand what's working, what's not working, what residents need from the city to address neighborhood level opportunities and challenges. The plan suggests that we zoom in a little bit and try to break the city down into smaller areas. We're a city of 30-some thousand. That's the same size as a neighborhood plan when you're in Denver, but it's not quite granular enough for us here in Wheat Ridge. So there was a mapping exercise. You may recall some of the images on the screen reflect an exercise from a 2018 open house that was a starting point for how to break the city into smaller logical geographies. And then lastly, the consultant team specifically recommended that we not use consultants for this engagement program. We're really in it for the long run, and we're trying to create long-lasting relationships and dialogues, which are really hard to achieve without making this a permanent program with a permanent staff. And so the 2020 budget approved the 2 positions, one with a planning expertise and one with an engagement expertise. In a moment, I'll introduce Jeff, who started with us earlier this year as our senior neighborhood planner. We completed the recruitment process for our second staff person in March, the engagement specialist, but we've not yet made an offer because COVID-19 has resulted in a hiring freeze for most of our vacant positions. So that's not clear when we'll be able to hire that position or what impact it has on our schedule. But Jeff Hurt is here, and he's been working hard on that blank slate that we gave him in starting this program. Just want to give you a little bit of his background since he doesn't like to talk about himself. Jeff is actually somewhat familiar with the city, so you may recognize him. He's not only a Jeffco resident, but he started his planning career here in Wheat Ridge in the Community Development Department in 2004, just before that original NRS document. In addition to his time here, he's also worked in Denver and in Boulder, so larger and smaller cities, also at the Regional Planning Agency in Kansas City. He's worked in the private sector as well. And we were really excited to have Jeff join our team because he brings the wide range of expertise that we need to engage the community on a really wide range of topics. So with that, I'm very happy to turn it over to Jeff and introduce him to you.
Thanks, Lauren. And nice to meet you all virtually, strangely, hopefully in person soon. I'll just make a quick comment, and then I've got a little bit of presentation here. We broke it up for you with 3 different staff, but just real quick, when I saw this job was open, I was really excited to pursue it. Having looked at the NRS actually and what Lauren articulated in terms of the engagement recommendation, I thought it was really forward thinking to kind of recognize that most people view the world through the lens of their neighborhood, and they want to talk about issues at that level, and to structure a program and a recommendation around that, I think is really forward thinking. Having worked in other places and that do business differently, I think it's a great approach and a really good fit for Wheat Ridge. So I'm excited to work on it. I know that a lot of folks are anxious to get going, myself included, and so I'm going to share briefly kind of what we've already done to advance this recommendation, and then get into kind of the nuts and bolts of this program that we've been designing, which is kind of the bulk of the presentation. So we're calling 2020 the year of engagement, at least internally among city staff. And so a few things we've done so far tied to that NRS recommendation. We've launched 2 online platforms, one for public hearings where votes are being taken, so that's Wheat Ridge Speaks. And then we've done What's Up Wheat Ridge, the online engagement platform, and I'll talk about that in a moment. We've formed an interdepartmental task force of various folks working on projects with engagement components, with sort of a guiding document around their work. That's part of your packet. And then the Let's Talk program, that's what we're calling the neighborhood engagement program that I'll share with you here in a moment. And then I'll share really quick in the short term something we are doing more sort of tangibly on this recommendation. We have a new page on What's Up Wheat Ridge. That's sort of this COVID landscape page. And I've got a link at the end of the presentation, and we'll follow up with you with details on this. But we're going to launch it's actually live right now, a new activity where folks can pin comments to a map, upload photos, issues and opportunities in their neighborhood. Our hope is we can push this out and get some good feedback in terms of what folks want to talk about at the neighborhood level, where there might be concentrations of folks that want to engage with the city on specific issues. Happy to talk about that, but that is something we're excited about.
Some really cute models and cool looking models on your We Are in This Together page.
Are those
Are you on that?
No, but my kids are, and so's the mayor.
I think Allie is on there too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll talk a little bit about the program that we've been designing. This is just the logo and showing Applewood and East Wheat Ridge. Not that we're focusing necessarily on those neighbors, just to give you a sense of sort of the branding and the types of signs you'll see and postcards and things like that. We're calling it Let's Talk Wheat Ridge. So I'll start at the high level of what this program proposal is and kind of drill down into some of the details. In general, the purpose, and certainly this is in your packet, is to create systems that the city can be responsive to neighborhood issues and opportunities on an ongoing basis. And so the approach, again, high level, is sort of the cyclical approach where, and I'll talk a little bit when we look at the schedule, essentially ramp up periods followed by neighborhood blitz periods where we tackle 2 neighborhoods at a time in rounds over the course of about 2 years, covering the whole city, using the NRS neighborhood boundaries as a starting point. And I'll talk about some potential modifications to that map. And then I'll talk a little bit about this idea of not just, I think it's framed in the NRS as a listening tour. We're trying to get away from that in terms of, it's not just listening to people for a couple of years, it's looking to take action concurrently. I'll talk a little bit about that. So we've developed some guiding principles for the program. And so these are just sort of, I guess the way we view it is our commitment as staff and commitment from the program to implement this recommendation. And happy to talk about these in more detail, and there's more detail in the packet certainly. But I'm going to walk through these, just sort of a really important touchstone for the program as we launch into different neighborhoods. The first one being keep an open mind. So that's directly from the NRS, this idea of not having preconceived notions of what the issues are in each neighborhood. Certainly we need structure to the conversations, but we want to listen. We want folks to tell us what the issues are, and kind of go from there. The second one is to be flexible and adaptable. So constantly pivoting back to the sort of core purpose of being most responsive to neighborhood issues and opportunities at that level. So for example, we have this approach of kind of having this first year trial period of this program and then stopping, potentially assessing and adapting the program. Idea being we want to be adaptable to this core purpose. The third is to be action oriented. And I know we've heard from various folks, and we agree that, certainly we want to be engaged in listening, but we also want to identify action items that we can advance concurrently, and not wait on other neighborhoods. So that's a big part of this program, is to kind of have that built in, to the extent we can take action on things we hear sooner than later. And then the fourth guiding principle is basically being realistic about what options we frame with the community, in terms of trade-offs, framing. A lot of people don't fully recognize unintended consequences, costs, and really focusing on the benefits. And so framing the issues holistically for folks. And then certainly to simplify things. I think as we all know, we tend to overcomplicate things in terms of how we communicate, and a lot of bureaucratic jargon. Simplify things, and that benefits everyone really when we communicate that way. And then the fifth is to create a citywide structure that's sort of standardized, so we have efficiencies there and consistency across different neighborhoods, but to customize both the content in terms of identifying neighborhood-specific issues people want to talk about, and then also the methods. So different neighborhoods will want to engage differently. Some are more active on social media, some are more on word of mouth, and adapting the strategies to kind of be responsive to that. And so we've got a brief narrative in the staff report on defining success. I won't read through this, but it's essentially, and something we can pivot back to as we're evaluating the program, but making sure we're having a thorough understanding of the issues at the neighborhood level, building trust, better empowering neighborhoods to work with the city, and certainly bringing in as many people and as diverse of opinions as possible at the neighborhood level. The schedule that we have, and so this is really high level. There's certainly a more detailed schedule behind this that I'm happy to talk about, but at a high level, what we've mapped out is essentially ramp up and blitz cycles. So, and we've seen other communities kind of take this approach, but it's pretty unique to Wheat Ridge, what we're doing here. The idea being spend 2 to 3 months ramping up to each round of neighborhoods and engaging with 2 neighborhoods per blitz, as we're calling it. And doing that for about half of the city for this first year, and then taking some time to check back in with council. And there will be periodic check-ins with council throughout, but using that as a milestone to kind of look at what's working, what's not working, how can we adapt the program and evolve it to be responsive to kind of its core purpose. And I'll also say, the timing of these could vary. I mean, we're going to learn as we go here. The ramp up periods could take longer and the blitzes could take shorter, but just staying within that general framework of approximately 2-year cycles to cover the city. And then also caveat this with kind of reiterating what Lauren said in terms of the staffing. This program and kind of the structure was built around the idea of having an engagement specialist that again was funded, and COVID created challenges for us. So with staffing limitations, we may need to make adjustments here, but we're going to plow ahead with this plan. And so each neighborhood, so leading up to these blitzes and so in this sort of ramp up period, each neighborhood will get its own custom engagement strategy. So addressing whatever the unique sort of issues and opportunities are and stakeholders, how people want to be engaged, venues, all that kind of stuff. And certainly COVID throws a wrench in this, but we've been adapting and thinking around that. We are still confident we can move forward. Things just look a little bit different in the short term in terms of more focused on virtual, small groups, socially distanced groups. But, absent COVID and that not happening, certainly we are looking at any number of innovative strategies, but stuff like pints and policies we've done before, going to local coffee shops, bars, people's front porches, having those types of conversations is what we had in mind, but we're going to have to adapt it a bit, certainly with COVID. And so that's sort of the overall approach for the program that we're sort of rolling out tonight. The specific thing that I think we wanted council's eyes on and a conversation on was about the neighborhoods themselves and how we sequence them and what sort of factors we use to sequencing these neighborhoods in for engagement. So I'm going to walk through the first sort of the boundaries of the neighborhoods. And again, these aren't like official, yours doesn't have official neighborhoods. This isn't us proposing official neighborhoods for council's considerations. These are just units of geography for engagement to kind of break the city down into more granular levels. And so again, this is based on the NRS map that was provided, but just to quickly walk through the modifications we're proposing to that map for engagement. First would be to extend Applewood west to include Clear Creek Crossing, so Applewood gets a little bit bigger. The second is to extend Bel Air west to include areas south of Clear Creek. And then third is to break East Wheat Ridge actually into two geographies. This was based on some analysis we did of population distribution and land area distribution. And we also looked at Nextdoor, which is, I think, our most active social media platform and how boundaries are drawn there. So for example, East Wheat Ridge has taken per the NRS has about 40% of the city's population almost, which is surprising how high that was. So to break that up seemed prudent from our perspective. So it would be actually 10 neighborhoods and not 9 under this approach. And then these are the council district boundaries. We can certainly come back to that and how they interplay with that. And then we have some data in the packet in terms of population distribution across these neighborhoods and council districts. And so some of the factors, so from staff's perspective, we would want to stay pretty objective in terms of using qualitative and quantitative factors to assess which neighborhoods should be earlier than later in terms of focused engagement. But our recommendation, our approach is to look at metrics related to change that's occurring, anticipated to change or is changing in a neighborhood. And there's a number of like specific metrics we could use to get at that. And then some other qualitative metrics like basically the extent of attention that the neighborhood has gotten from the city relative to, could be area plans, could be regulatory efforts, could be any number of things. And there's certainly equitable distribution across the city and council districts, and then feedback from folks, obviously from council, and then we hope through the What's Up Wheat Ridge activity, we get some good feedback to inform this effort as well. So this is the kind of the crux of what we thought would be helpful for council to provide feedback on. Certainly we're welcome to feedback on all this. So next steps for Let's Talk. So that's what we're calling again, this engagement program, which would be a permanent thing. To reiterate, we're not talking about just 2 years and stop. This is something we're looking to create as a permanent program. We are going to, staff is going to follow up with council in the coming days with a couple things. One, a question of who you all think that we should be talking to in your district. So asking for 2 names of people that would be helpful for us to start to get to know essentially what the issues are and how people might want to engage in your district and in these neighborhoods. So that, look for that question for those potential names. And then we'll share information about the What's Up Wheat Ridge page as part of that correspondence that we'll be pushing out on social media. And then if you all wanted to share that as well, that would be fantastic. And then we'll be doing some analysis around neighborhoods to inform the sequencing of sort of these ramp up and blitz cycles. The schedule has us launching into the first set of neighborhoods late summer, early fall. That schedule I shared has October as the start date. We would certainly hope to start sooner than that. And we're aiming to do that because we know we're ready to get going here. So that concludes my presentation. Again, we're open to feedback on the sort of the overall framework, but looking for specific feedback on the neighborhoods and how we sequence them in and the factors. And then we have a program email up on the screen, and then the website for that activity I mentioned is on the screen as well. So that concludes my presentation, and excited to hear what you all have to say.
Okay, Jeff, well, thank you very much. A very interesting presentation, and it's great to have you with us, and look forward to being able to meet in person at some point. Why don't we open this up for questions from council? And let me just kind of move this over so I can get everybody on here. And if you've got a question or comment, just raise your hand and I will call on you. Ms. Holteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you everyone in planning for all your work on this. I know we spent a lot of time last year working on this, and it's exciting to see implementation steps coming before us. I actually have several things, but I just want to start with one question regarding the hiring freeze on the second staffing position. And I'm wondering, you know, what are the options on that? Is that something that we could actually take a look at lifting that hiring freeze on and moving forward? I mean, if we have a great applicant, it's a pretty ambitious program. And the idea behind that, different positions that were formed, you know, one was to be really embedded within the planning department, to be at the table for those small discussions. And then the other person was going to be more community facing. And I think that distinction was important. So I'm just curious what our options are with that.
Yeah, we're looking at many different options with that right now, Rachel, and you know, we're still trying to track revenues on a monthly basis to make sure that we can afford to pay which employees we currently have on staff. So, you know, there might be an opportunity in a month or two when we have a better idea of revenues, but I'll let Ken speak to this too. But what we plan to do in the interim is to use current staff, both in Ken's planning department and in Allison's department to help with the community engagement and outreach part of it. So I don't think we'll be missing that part of it if we don't hire a new person right away. But we've already gone through the hiring process, and we have somebody in mind who we believe will be ready to start when we can pay that person. But I'll turn it over to maybe Ken or Lauren, who maybe want to speak to that more.
Patrick, I don't think I have a lot to add. I mean, I think, you know, we're speaking of granular, we're obviously watching revenue projections at a granular level right now and trying to, you know, see what this looks like for us in terms of COVID impacts. And so we're, like the rest of the city, generally subject to the hiring freeze. You know, I think it's important to note that this in no way impacts our ability to roll out the program. I think it's more a question of timing. And we have engaged a couple of our other existing planners in the department to offer a support role. We just know that their days and job responsibilities are fairly full, so they're only going to be able to kind of dedicate a handful of hours on a weekly basis to supporting Jeff's program. So we'd love to get that other person in and really go full bore on this, but we're going to implement the program in the near term regardless.
Thank you. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate the presentation. You guys have done a great job on this so far. A couple of things that I'd like to see us take a look at as far as the overall framework. When we talk about engaging the neighborhoods and wanting to talk to them and listen to what they have to say, I think part of this is making sure that we're all speaking the same language, or that we all know how to play the same game. Because as much as we want to talk to the neighbors about what they want, what they don't want, unless they understand the development process and the ways in which development is done in the city, it becomes difficult to really understand exactly what they want and what they don't want. And so I think as a part of this framework, we should have some sort of component around educating our neighbors about what can physically be done with my particular property, what's the process to rezone my property, what's the process to voice my support or concern. And I can send you all these in an email, but how do you effectively engage with the rezoning process as a neighbor or as an adjacent resident to a particular rezoning case? How do I find out about potential cases as they're coming up so I'm an informed resident of a particular neighborhood? And even so far as how do I become a member of the Planning Commission, so that as much as we're engaging people, we're also educating them on this process so that they, both the residents and the city staff, are speaking the same language. So that's a couple of the items that I'd like to see added to this. One other question I had is relating to, as we begin to talk and discuss with neighbors their thoughts and concerns, we're inevitably going to stir up complaints or code violations or other issues that are going to be brought up through this process? And do we have a way to sort of pipeline those to the relevant departments so they get solved? Because if we talk to residents and they say, we want this solved or this issue resolved, and we're talking to the community development department, but not code enforcement, and that doesn't really get solved, how do we pipeline that so that those issues get solved so that people feel like they're being listened to?
Ken, you had your hand up in there?
I did. Thank you, Mayor.
Good.
Those are all really awesome comments, Mr. Urban, and things that I think we're generally thinking about. So glad you are too. We actually have on the future agenda, I think we actually have a date. I don't have a future agenda on it on me, but we've got kind of a zoning 101 for city council as well, just to kind of understand what zoning looks like. So hopefully we can get a lot of good community participation in that education effort that's coming up. Again, in the theme of, we've got 4 relatively new council members that, probably don't have a great amount of background as to how the rezoning process works in Wheat Ridge. And so that's on our radar. We're working on that presentation really in the next 4 to 6 weeks, I think. And Lauren, you can respond to that. And then in terms of the issues that come up, agreed. We don't know. We've got an open slate, an open table in terms of what issues people can bring up. And that open slate could lead to things like code enforcement. We get that. Could lead to traffic issues. Who knows? And so we've certainly engaged the rest of the department directors and their support team to make sure that when issues do come up in this neighborhood engagement effort, that we're ready to respond, not just from the community development department, but from other departments that are impacted by the types of issues that are raised by the community.
Thank you. And one last thing that I had on this is, how will the engagement handle current ongoing applications or quasi-judicial matters, and how do we navigate those existing applications or those applications that come in the middle of this and residents want to have their voice heard on those particular issues without, but I guess one of my concerns is that if we have a listening session or if we have an engagement, if someone comes in and says what they want to say on a particular issue, they've sort of, spilled their candy in the lobby. They're not really interested in coming back to some other meeting and giving their voice on a particular issue. So how do we focus that energy to where they need to be speaking those concerns so that we're not diffusing those concerns?
Another good comment, Mr. Urban, and I think it's to the extent that there would be pending applications in a neighborhood where we're endeavoring to engage them. It presents a great opportunity for exactly doing that, right? Which is telling how they can actively participate and how they can't, right? They're free to make comments to us. They're free to communicate with staff, and then we can communicate to them, what the formal public hearing process looks like, what the new Wheat Ridge Speaks platform looks like. So hopefully that becomes a great way to really engage people in these new engagement tools that we've created to get the word out.
Thank you.
I'll add to that. Depending on resources, a part of the plan is as we go into each neighborhood, we know people are going to want to talk about specific sites and specific proposals, to be proactive with that and have that information for them with status updates, and even having something on individual web pages on What's Up Wheat Ridge that has, here are the major projects happening and here's how you can engage. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to get ahead of that, so people know what the right place is and kind of channel that energy to the right place.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Goff, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Just quick, I'd just like to add also to speak to Mr. Urban's question or comment about education on city processes. We are working with Local Works right now to create a Civic Academy. I'm not sure if that's what it's going to be called, but that's going to be very integrated and intensive, involving all departments to hopefully we'll get a good turnout. So those folks will go back to their neighborhood and share what they learned, but it'll talk about zoning and how they can get active and participate. And so just one more opportunity for citizens to learn about the process. That should start this fall, I believe.
Thank you. Additional comments from council? Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a question. So I get about What's Up Wheat Ridge and Let's Talk, Wheat Ridge Speaks. What if people don't have a computer? How are you going to communicate?
Well, and of course, there's a vacuum going right now at City Hall. They're cleaning right now, so bear with me. It's the way it works. So yeah, I mean, that's obviously going to be a reality, and COVID throws a wrench in our ability to lean less on online engagement. But our hope is, as part of the sort of the ramp up periods in the individual neighborhoods, and certainly with council's help, depending on the district, to identify, just start with a list of key stakeholders we should be reaching out to directly, or they could reach out to us directly through phone conversations or whatever, and just let things kind of go from there, and then ask them who else should we be talking to. And through those more focused conversations, you know, my hope is we reach those folks that don't have a computer. We're also looking to have, you know, certainly we would, depending on the neighborhood, be putting up signs with contact information and phone numbers. So not everything is about going to a website. It's about a phone number and a human being too.
Okay, because that is happening. I mean, some people can't afford it. Okay, that's one issue. And it's not really just about COVID. I mean, it is the issue, the financial issue of being able to have this. So contacting a couple people and then they contact another couple people or whatever seems pretty limited to me. Those are people that they know. So what about meetings that are, when we're able to do this, that are held somewhere where people can congregate, maybe even less than 10 people or whatever, you know, just so I don't want to limit it to just certain individuals who have everything next door, all this kind of stuff, because some people don't do social media.
You know, sort of along that vein, one of the strengths, I think, of the update on the NRS that we did in 2019 was the ability to go out into the neighborhoods and find venues that were close to people's homes to have meetings. So, you know, in my neighborhood, maybe the old firehouse, or I went to another one up at, you know, Pizza on 38th, and you know, around the community, so that it's handy for people.
Right. Sounds good. Thank you.
Sure. Additional comments, questions? And Ken, I think you were talking a part of in your staffing, or in your a little 4-page, the involvement strategy in the June 2020. You were talking about a citywide task force, so that your staff would convene with other representatives in different departments within the city, so that we had a good coordination effort with other departments.
Yeah, we really have kind of two tools in that regard. One that's a standing committee, that's our internal engagement task force, that is you know, using tools like What's Up Wheat Ridge to push out information in the various ways that tool allows you to. So we've got a cross-departmental team that Jeff is kind of currently staffing, though, to Rachel's point, when we hire the neighborhood engagement specialist, they would probably have a pretty active role in staffing that effort. And then parallel to that, when we do begin this neighborhood engagement program, we have other department directors on board to understand that they're going to need to support that effort in a similar fashion with some of those same individuals, perhaps, but perhaps other individuals as different topical issues come up.
Thank you. Mr. Stites.
Actually, Ms. Hulteen had her hand up first. She can go first.
Oh, wow. Ms. Hulteen, then. He yielded the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Council Member Stites. So I have a couple of things. And again, I was really excited to read this document, just knowing how much citizen input went into it. One thing I want to mention to Council Member Hutchinson one of the strategies that the NRS committee employed was a pretty specific, how do you reach hard to reach demographics? And we actually specifically, how do you reach seniors because they're not online? And I was excited to see that that was mentioned, how do you reach those demographics? So thank you for including that. So I have like 3 questions. The first one is, in your comments, Lauren, you talked about how this iteration really looked at neighborhoods as functioning differently than the corridors. And I'm just curious, in your engagement strategy, how are you differentiating those conversations around what the neighbors would like to see within their neighborhoods versus the continuity and sort of like cross-neighborhood, cross-district aspects of the corridors and the economic development that tend to kind of supersede the neighborhood sometimes. So I'm just curious if you have any thoughts on and sort of how you're approaching that differentiation as you go into the neighborhoods.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's hard because, it's really hard to draw discrete boundaries and say, like, we're only talking about this in this conversation. So certainly, like Jeff said, we're, there's no preconceived topics or conversations. So we're open to that. And we acknowledge that while corridors need to function in a different way than neighborhoods, they have an influence on the adjacent neighborhood. So we don't have a specific plan. We definitely want to understand, to the extent we either have a corridor plan that we'd be educating folks on sort of what's recommended, or to the extent we could be having maybe an upcoming corridor plan. We've long wanted to do some planning on 44th Avenue in the same way that it's a discussion of a quasi-judicial case. If it's a corridor topic that might be a distraction to the neighborhood planning, then we'll maybe redirect folks. And if it's a corridor topic that really sort of is integral into what we can do in here and affect in the neighborhood, then we want to sort of welcome that. So it's hard to have a one-size-fits-all answer, but we're definitely always aware of that, that sort of ebb and flow of how corridors and neighborhoods relate to each other.
Thank you, Lauren. Then my second question kind of segues into that a little bit. So a lot of the topics or sort of approaches that I saw mentioned in here were really sort of geared towards land use topics. And I think one of the things that the NRS points out, and certainly I heard while I was campaigning, is the relationship between transportation and land use. And I know a lot of significant concerns within neighborhoods is actually street safety and how cars, how development impacts neighborhood streets. I'm just wondering if that's something you're planning on integrating as topics, or if you're really looking more just at land use.
I think I'll maybe take a first crack. I think we feel like we expect a wide range of topics from, I want a better playground to we need a neighborhood traffic management to we have code enforcement issues. A lot of the groundwork we've done over the last 6 months in coming up with a community involvement sort of mission and task forces, understanding that these are not discrete topics in the city and they're not discrete topics for a community member. So while planning is taking the lead in this program, as Ken's described, we've queued up the other divisions and departments to know that they need to be partners in this effort. And we're really looking for efficiencies in how we engage the public, right? So code enforcement, many of you know, will have sort of their twice a year TLC meetings, and they don't get great attendance, but if we can have them come to one of our neighborhood meetings, then it's a little bit better. In terms of traffic specifically, or transportation specifically, I think what actually works quite well in our favor is that we reorganized, and now engineering and planning are within one department. And there's a great example of an efficiency that we're finding in terms of being sort of better partners and coming at it from a similar lens. So they'll be with us at many of these meetings, or at least sort of helping us to break down and digest some of the feedback we're getting.
I would add to that, so land use and transportation are obviously like intertwined. If folks just start from a place of wanting to talk about one or the other, I think it's actually on us to be proactive and steer them toward a more holistic understanding of the issue anyway. So if they just want to talk about, I want neighborhood retail, I think it's on us to steer the conversation toward, well, that has other implications related to parking and how people get around in your neighborhood, and making sure they understand the big picture. So I think that's a really good point.
Excellent. Thank you. And I have one last question. I also have 2 dogs in my room that might have an opinion too. So one thing that just kind of strikes me, having been involved in the neighborhood mapping exercise, is because Wheat Ridge doesn't have distinct neighborhood boundaries that we've worked with. is there going to be confusion about calling them neighborhoods? Because I know like within Bel Air, you know, there's like distinctly Melrose Manor. They think they are their own neighborhood. I'm in Bel Air on the map, but I'm in Hillcrest. And I recognize at the same time we're concurrently rolling out the Sustainable Neighborhoods program where we're asking neighbors to go out and self-identify their neighborhood. And I'm just wondering, this is like I recognize this is a little bit of a wrench, but could we look at a different word than neighborhood to avoid some of that identity conflict? Because I can just see there being confusion about where do you live, and in one process you live in Bel Air and Melrose Manor throws their block party, and then Hillcrest Heights goes for the sustainable neighborhoods, and we're all in the same neighborhood. Like, so it's esoteric, but I also think it does create confusion in the community. So I just want to throw out if another name like ward or district or something else has been considered to avoid that confusion around neighborhood identity.
I've certainly thought about it and been unable to come up with anything that's catchy and non-bureaucratic. But that would be great to have some suggestions on that front, because we've talked about it. Yeah, I mean, we meet regularly with the Sustainable Neighborhoods team and Kayla and Marianne, and we've talked about the overlap and the potential confusion. So I think, yeah, we're at a stage now where we're open to ideas, at least in terms of the terminology.
Awesome. Well, I will noodle it and encourage my peers to also do so, just because I think it would serve our community to not have conflicting concurrent processes with different geographies. So I just want to say thank you, Jeff. I'm excited. I'm sorry this is a virtual meeting, but I'm just, we scored getting you on board on this, and I'm really excited for what's next.
Thank you. We scored getting you on the NRS committee, it sounds like.
All right. Who else wants to score tonight with a question? Oh, Mr. Stites.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad I let Ms. Hulteen go first. She actually stole one of my questions. Just one of the things that I agree with her on is that we do need to kind of watch where neighborhoods become those big thoroughfares, because those kind of meet, and that's tends to be a lot where we get the friction with a lot of our neighbors. But I also agree with Mr. Urban that a lot of the disconnect I see, and as I was campaigning and while I was doing the NRS stuff, is we're not necessarily speaking the same language as a lot of our citizens. They're looking for one outcome that through a lot of these processes can't be managed right now. So hopefully we can kind of do that, but we do need to make sure that we're speaking the same languages and somehow educating those our citizens that of how those processes work and what goes on, because I think I had a completely different view, and I know talking to a lot of the people on council now, that I did before joining the NRS board and kind of working through those processes and seeing that if you want something, there's a trade-off, right? Everything comes at a cost. So that's really important for our citizens to look at, especially as I'm looking at the comments on Wheat Ridge Speaks today from some of our residents, is make sure that we're speaking the same language. My one question is, as we're rolling this out over the next, hopefully 2 years, and Mr. Urban kind of touched on this, what are we doing in the interim with all of the different land use cases that are coming up and different things like that? Is there a process that as we're going through this, are we going to be looking at suspending some of our quasi judicial cases? Are we doing anything like that to slow those down as we're going through this process, so we're not making a lot of decisions before we've actually had an opportunity to talk to our citizens? I don't know if I phrased that in a good enough question, but what are we going to do in the interim, I guess, is my question.
Well, I'll defer to Ken and Lauren on that one, probably.
Fair enough, Jeff. We haven't thought about suspending any of those land use processes. I mean, the right to request a private property rezoning is certainly codified in Chapter 26 of the Municipal Code. Now, would we, as city staff, recommend to council that you pursue some sort of a legislative zoning or a city-initiated rezoning? Unlikely, until we, get a better sense of where we're at with these neighborhoods and they have an opportunity to opine on where they're at. But I don't think, absent some sort of a moratorium ordinance, which is probably an option. I don't want to pretend to be our city attorney tonight, but that it would take something like that to take away a private property owner's right under the existing code to request a private property initiated rezoning.
Mr. Johnson, I had a question. We've got scheduled, I believe, an update or revision to the 44th Avenue plan. How would that integrate with this neighborhood outreach process?
It's a good question, and we don't have a absolute answer for you. We've, at Patrick's request, identified across all departments opportunities for potential budget cuts to solve the nut that we think we might have with revenue reductions associated with COVID. And that's an active, ongoing process. But that is one of the potential projects that our department has offered up as something that could be cut. And as Jeff alluded to, maybe not specifically, but if that is something that we feel we need to cut and council approves that budget cut as part of the budget balancing efforts that we feel we need to do, that could then influence, the timing of when we would have outreach on that corridor as part of the neighborhood engagement program.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Additional questions from council? Well, it's a very good discussion. I'm really excited about this. I think we had a really good NRS update, and this was one of the key outgrowths on this. I'm really excited to have Jeff Hurt with us. Jeff, thanks so much for your work on this, and Lauren and Ken also. This is I think a really good report, and I'm really excited to see it go forward. So,
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Hulteen's got her hand up.
Oh, she does. Well, let's give her the floor.
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to be mindful that staff asked for specific feedback on the prioritization and sequencing of the neighborhoods. And I'm not sure we actually provided that, and want to see if that's something staff would still like feedback on.
Okay, well, let's have staff speak up as to which further questions, and see if we can prioritize those.
I'll speak to that. And we thought that might be something that council would have feedback on, but again, as Jeff explained, we've kind of framework under which we think will inform that decision-making process that involves a variety of kind of qualitative and quantitative factors in terms of the amount of change that's occurring. It could be evolving factors that we don't even know right now that might come up in the next several months for some reason. Places where there's more change occurring that wasn't the case, a month ago. Places that haven't seen a lot of planning attention. So neighborhoods that haven't seen planning attention is one of those factors. And we want to be mindful of kind of spreading it across council districts so that, all of your districts are getting some attention as part of this program in the, early part of it. So those are some of the compelling factors, but if you don't have specific comments, we're okay with that. We'll be reporting back with you with a recommendation in the next couple of months with what we think is a logical program for that rollout. So if you have other feedback, we welcome it, but we were just speculating that you might have feedback, but we don't have to have it if you want to leave it in our hands.
I'm good if you're good.
Thank you. Any other, Ms. Hutchinson?
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a question and also a concern about dividing District 1 in half. I don't see that with the other districts so much, and I don't know if it's because there's more population there or what, and if one or two divisions are supposed to be worked on the first year and then the second year, the third and fourth. How do you connect both areas of East Wheat Ridge as being able to participate together?
Yeah, the division, you could realistically break East Wheat Ridge into three groups, 38th and 32nd being the boundaries. We went with 32nd. in part because of the population distribution, recognizing that it straddles different council districts. But, you know, I think we're open to suggestions on that front. It's really more about finding a good dividing line between different types of neighborhoods. And I don't know if Ken or Lauren, you have any other thoughts on that?
You know, I think it was largely driven by that population number, that if we didn't break it up, we'd be looking at, you know, 40% of the city's population, which seemed like on our kind of program here in terms of breaking down neighborhoods, seemed like a disproportionately large neighborhood. And then from a kind of a land use and transportation perspective, we thought that, you know, 38th is probably a bigger influencing factor for what will be the northern portion of that, both from a land use and from a transportation perspective. So that was some of the reasoning behind that, Mrs. Hulteen. Or Hutchinson, excuse me.
Hutchinson.
Thank you.
One of those ages.
There's a lot of
But
H's
okay.
here.
District 1 is 38th to 26th from Wadsworth to Sheridan. So that's District 1. And I think people who even live by 26 have concerns about what's going on 38th. And when we're talking about land use, there's been more stuff going on in District 1 than a lot of the other districts as far as scraping and doing whatever, you know, is happening in fills of neighborhoods. I think it should all be together because I do believe that everybody in District 1 is informed and have concerns about District 1, and they made a choice why to live there. So it's not, I don't think it's so much about 38th Avenue, it's the neighborhoods. I mean, that's my own opinion, but
I think
that's what I think.
Go
Thank
ahead.
you.
I was going to say, I mean, so the breaking down of these geographies, again, if you come up with a different term rather than neighborhoods, is going to be about focusing on the issues within that geography and targeting the outreach for folks in that geography. But it's not going to, certainly not going to exclude folks from the surrounding areas from participating. So if we start with what we call Southeast Wheat Ridge, south of 32nd Avenue, and, you know, we put signs up and we do a social media blast and all that stuff. If folks from areas north of 32nd, closer to 38th and points north, you know, hear about it and want to engage, we're certainly open to that. It's just more about breaking the issues down into more reasonable geographies, not as much about identity and you belong to this neighborhood or that or neighborhood. It's just finding efficiencies with the engagement, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Just so you know, there's always two opinions on every issue. I probably would take the other side of the coin than Ms. Hutchinson, and think that, you know, there's such density over here on the east side that you might need to have a smaller geography. But those are all things to sort of evaluate as we get through into the program. But I appreciate that comment, Ms. Hutchinson.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, I just want to thank you all for your fine comments as usual. We really were looking forward to getting in front of you today, and I've been really, you know, pleased with the progress that Jeff has been making, and we're mindful of the I think Ms. Dozman's comments I hearken back to, which is we need to walk and chew gum. So we hope to keep moving forward on active engagement. Even though we've slowed down a little bit because of COVID.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Try to keep that gum off the bottom of your shoe as you're chewing it. I want to thank Mr. Hurt and Ms. Mikulak and Mr. Johnstone for joining us. So thank you for a great report, and look forward to seeing this program as it rolls out. We will go into item number 2. This is our staff reports. Are you able to provide us a report from the high country, Mr. Goff?
Yes, just real quick. I just wanted to address, I believe everybody on council is receiving emails. Again, I know there was a few today from citizens and residents asking about our police department's procedures and policies and how they align with the Senate bill, or not the Senate bill, but the bill that just passed the legislature, and I'm not sure if the governor signed it yet. I don't think so, but he intends to any day now. So the good news is our department does align with almost probably 90% of what bill has been passed. So Wheat Ridge is in really good shape. You know, we've implemented the body cam program a couple of years ago. We don't allow chokeholds as a form of restraint. And you know, it wasn't specifically spelled out in our policies, but training did not allow it. And so we are, I think it already has been done. We're making sure that language of chokehold is actually in our policies. That's not allowed. So the chief gets it and understands it, that there's probably some more that we still need to do in Wheat Ridge. And I think we're very open to that. And the chief likes to respond to those residents who are asking. So if you're okay, you can forward those to him to respond directly, or I know some of you like to respond directly too. So if you would like some talking points from him, we can get those to you also. But he's trying to get to know the community, and he wants to reach out to as many people as possible. So just want to know, let you know that. Rachel or Ms. Dozman, you have a question?
Yeah, so just speaking to what you were just talking about as far as like talking points, because I know you had forwarded an email from Chief Murtha responding directly to that, but if we could maybe get some just bullet points as far as what we have done, are doing, are willing to do, that we could either send to our constituents, or I'm comfortable forwarding that to him as well, but I know that that's probably gonna, clutter up his email as well. So I'm happy to answer that. So.
But yeah, we'll get you some more language. I think we've sent several different emails, so we'll try to get you one that you can use.
But yeah, just a cohesive one pager. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stites?
Had a quick question from a constituent on that similar lines the other day, and maybe if the chief is sending out an email, what would the type of response be if we had like rioting, looting going on in the city? Whereas we're seeing certain government or certain cities jump in and try to stop it. Some cities are kind of sitting back more. Just kind of interested to know, and a couple of residents were interested to know what the response would be from our police as far as that goes.
Yeah, and I think I remember those emails that we did get, and I think the chief did respond to those folks directly. But is Chief Murtha on? Allie or Chief, are you on the call tonight? I know he had his testing today to get post certified in Colorado. It was delayed for several months because of COVID, so he was anxious to get that done. So he still may be testing today, but I don't think he's on tonight.
He is. He's here and he's just unmuted. Yeah.
Okay. Chief, did you hear that question?
I did.
Thank you, Chief.
The question from Mr. Stites regarding how we would react. Is that the last one?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So that's a complicated question to answer and give you one specific answer. And I'll say that with the experience of having worked in Baltimore and also in my previous job at several different events that became known as riots. They're really celebrations that turned into riotous behavior. So in Wheat Ridge, it's different geography than cities, and there's certainly different. There's a thought process that has to go along with really what the citizens expect from the Wheat Ridge Police Department. I mean, we are the representatives of Wheat Ridge, but from my experience, there is a message that the community needs to understand. We are here to protect the rights of peaceful protest, the right to peacefully assemble, but we would not allow the level of disorder to continue, because that leads to more disorder. And when we say that, we do have to balance that with what does intervention mean as far as escalation. So all those things are kind of put into the calculus, and we have to consider, does our presence, does our intervention create a worse situation in those instances? I will suggest to you that I'm not a huge fan of using tear gas and less lethal weapons until it's absolutely necessary. I'm not going to criticize people who have used them in the past, but it's been my experience that sometimes people, the presence of the police can exacerbate a situation, and there's a different way to approach it. And I've had that experience in not just Baltimore, but other places where, you know, your relationships, that's the time you can tap into the folks who can get in the middle of this thing and try and help you and really guide this to a different place. So I want to suggest that Wheat Ridge has those relationships, and I'm working on building them, I think, as Patrick alluded to. But, you know, it's a tough question to say, well, we would just hammer people. We wouldn't. It's a tough question to say, well, we would just allow it, because we wouldn't. But there has to be a real thoughtful, considerate process put into place as to what's going on and how do we make the best of a bad situation if a protest becomes a riot.
Thank you for that answer. Just one more question, sorry. I know when my grandfather was mayor, like a long, long time ago, he was also chief of police, all that stuff too, basically. He was, you know, kind of the head of the executive branch. Now, would that decision be something that you, the mayor, the city manager would make together? Is that something that you two would make? Is that just your call?
So let me just say that I don't ever operate in a vacuum, and that's not to pass the buck, but I think it's important that everybody's comfortable. Like I suggested at the beginning, this is a community, you know, this is really a decision of how the community feels that it needs to engage folks. And I, you know, I tend to take a softer approach to many of these events. And I think I take a holistic approach. If somebody flips a police car over, we're not going to get that upset. You know, the other night when we were in Denver and they, you know, they broke a few windshields on our cars, not ours, but Lakewood's and whatnot. You know, that's okay. That's okay, because we're not going to escalate that kind of thing into some other type of behavior or make it worse than it is. But where it comes to people and their businesses and that sort of thing, we have to be very thoughtful. But yeah, of course, I would consult with Patrick, the mayor. You know, I take input from you know, the politicians. That's important.
Thank you, Chief.
If I could just add to that too, and it is a very difficult question, I think, for the chief to answer. But you know, I think it's one of the reasons I hired the chief. Chief Murtha was, you know, when his time in Prince George's County, he was very community oriented based. You know, when I went to visit him, I went out into the community, met with many community members, and you know, I just knew that he wasn't a chief that was sitting behind the desk or sitting behind a tank or whatever, or a vest or a shield. He was out in the community dealing with problems on a daily basis. So, and I know that's what our community wants and needs. And so that's one reason Chief Murtha is here. So he can't say that probably. He's got to give a little more nuanced, I think, answer to your question, Mr. Stites. But I just want to assure you that's one of the reasons he was hired, because of his temperament and background.
If I can add one more thing, Mr. Mayor, if you don't mind. One of the issues, and I hate to dwell on the past, but one of the issues we had during celebrations that became riots was that the police sometimes tend to become part of the event, certainly ramping up the issue. And my approach to those was we were gonna put ourselves in a little more harm's way by taking off the gear, by dispersing and not being lined up against you know, folks who were starting to turn a protest into a riot. But we were going to intersperse with them. We find those few troublemakers and we'd make a few arrests, but we would be part of the people there. And I know that's tough for police officers to hear. What do you mean we're going to? But it really works well, and that's, you know, it goes hand in hand with what Patrick said. You know, community policing is about, you know, being part of the community, and you can't be us versus them. So sometimes you walk out in the middle of that crowd and you don't know what's going to happen. But my experience is it's usually a better result that way. And one more point of privilege, if you don't mind, to the folks who've reached out to me, and it's many of the council. I know that there's a lot of concern and people are working hard to better society and to, you know, to better their police department, but you've still managed to send support to the men and women of Wheat Ridge and the Wheat Ridge Police Department. I think, you know, they're better than most, probably better than all. So I thank you for that. Ms. Noslerbeck, I thank you for inviting me to walk, and I appreciate the engagement from all of you. So if you want to send me those complaints, those questions, those comments, I certainly am happy to answer them.
Thank you, Chief Murtha. We appreciate that. Does that conclude your staff report, Mr. Goff?
I'll leave it at that tonight.
Okay, great. Well, we will go to elected officials reports then. Anyone having an issue or something to say, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to give an update on the Business Stabilization Grant Program. We met earlier this afternoon and analyzed over 103 applications for the grant program. We're expecting to make announcements towards the end of this week relative to the award amounts, but we had a lot of great applicants and a lot of interest, and appreciate everybody that applied, and we're hoping to have this wrapped up hopefully by the end of the week.
Thank you. And thank you for your extra work and good work in that regard. We appreciate that. Additional elected officials reports. Ms. Holteen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to mention that tomorrow evening, Councilwoman Dozman and I are hosting a community listening session. And we encourage all citizens to participate. Information is available on the city's website. You can join us via Zoom, or there are several call-in numbers that are available. We will have Spanish translation as well as American Sign Language translation. And we just really recognize that there's a lot of disruptions to our civic life between COVID-19 and some of the civic unrest, concerns over systemic racism and community policing concerns. We're also hearing about masks and animal welfare. So we just welcome the community. It's not going to be a discussion or dialogue format. It will be genuinely a listening session. And Councilwoman Dozman and I have been meeting with staff to make sure that we conduct it in a way that is open to the community and that we have a chance to hear where they're coming from. So that's tomorrow night from 6:30 to 7:45. And we really look forward to hearing from our citizens. Ms. Dozman, do you have anything you want to add to that?
No, thank you. I tried to shoot you a text to see which of us needed to introduce it, and the phones are still down. So yes, I wanted to mention that the information is available on the website, and we're happy to hear from you. I have definitely felt like our civil dialogue has been disrupted. I really love connecting with my community, meeting friends, neighbors, and even family that live in Wheat Ridge at local restaurants, and I've felt disconnected to the community, and I hope to have many people join us, and I want to be able to listen and learn during this time. For me, this definitely did stem from some of the inequities that we've been seeing and have been highlighted during COVID-19, whether that's a disruption in broadband, internet, education, food, shelter, resources that a lot of community members do not have the same access to as others. And of course, the systemic racism that we've been seeing in our communities and talking about, whether that's police reform or allowing us to have that same access amongst different races. So I just wanted to thank Councilmember Holteen and the city staff for really just putting this together so quickly and doing such a wonderful job. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Holteen and Ms. Dozman for putting that on for us on tomorrow. Additional elected officials matters, Ms. Nosler-Beck.
Thanks, Mayor, and thanks, everybody. I just wanted to thank Chief Murtha for making it out to one of our gatherings out on the green and really helping open the conversation and the dialogue with the community on these issues that matter for everyone who's out marching or whatever they're doing in order to elevate the message that Black Lives Matter. And I just wanted to thank all of the council members and members of the community who have shown up to make sure that we can finally address this issue in our community, in the state, and in the country in terms of getting to the root of the issues with the systemic racism that we have in our country. So thank you very much. I'm proud to live in Wheat Ridge. It's a great place.
Thank you, Ms. Nosler-Beck. Appreciate that. Additional elected officials reports. Any other business to come before our study session tonight? Well, then let us close. Let me thank Mr. Hurt for being here. We appreciate your report. And Ms. Mikulak, thank you so much. Mr. Johnstone, thank you, counselors, for all joining us tonight, members of the public. I want to report that we had a successful coffee with the mayor on Saturday, and thank all the citizens who joined me on that. We'll be back on the second Saturday in July, because we've done June. So anyway, and I also want to put a plug in for the 2020 census. If you haven't filled out your census, you should do that now before the in-home enumerators start coming around, and they will be coming around the neighborhood at some point. So thank you if you've already completed your census. If there's no more business to come before us, we will stand adjourned, and we will be back in our regular meeting 1 week from tonight on June the 22nd at 7 o'clock. The virtual format, and also available for citizen comment at the podium in City Hall. So just look at the instructions on the website or touch base with Ms. Scheck and her team at City Hall. We appreciate everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and be safe. Goodbye.